All right, welcome to another video where we're breaking down the book of Proverbs. We're in chapter 3. Today we're looking at verse 6. In the last video we talked about verse 5 a lot. Verse 5 and 6 are intrinsically linked, but we've broken them down and isolated them and given each verse their due diligence because they both contain powerful information. Today we're looking at verse 6, and we'll see, like we did last time, how it connects back to verse 5 just a little bit. But let's just begin by going over here and reading it. We'll read verses 5 and 6 together. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Now, here's where we're at today. All right, verse 6. I want to spend our time looking at a couple key words that are going to give us insight into this text. Right? The four words we're going to really look at just a little bit that give us some insight here are ways, acknowledge, straight, and paths. Okay? So what I first want to begin by noting is this word ways is actually a word that can be used as a suffix. So think of our suffix in the English language, wise. If we say lengthwise or depthwise or money-wise, it's a suffix to denote that we're talking about the length or the depth or finances, right? Well, in the same way, we might be able to say lengthways, okay? But why that's important is because ways is a term used to describe the direction one is going in life. And we see this throughout the Bible numerous amounts of time, especially in the Old Testament, this ways, path language, as we're seeing right here. It's denoting the direction one is taking in life. And as we're going to see, that direction is really identified by actions, conduct, ethics. Okay, so let's pull up Exodus 18:20, okay, to display this a little bit further. It says, instruct them about the statutes and law and teach them the way to live and what they must do. Now notice here that way to live and must do need to be taught, okay? And they all refer to actions, conduct, ethics, character, things of that nature, okay? I also like this picture. I think it paints it pretty beautifully. Genesis 3:24. He drove the man out and stationed the cherubim and the flaming, whirling sword east of the Garden of Eden to guard the way to the tree of life. Now, the reason I like this so much is because we can see way being used here in the literal sense of a literal path that leads to a destination. But when we transfer that back over to the way the Bible often uses way and path to refer to our character, our conduct, our choices and direction in life, it refers to a literal path that leads to a destination. So each step that you take on this literal path, that if we're using the analogy in Genesis 3:24, each step is an action, right, that will take you somewhere. So in the same way, the actions of our lives are like steps on a path leading us to either life or death and destruction. So when we make choices based off what we believe to be true. And this is why it's so important that we believe in God's word. We trust in him and his promises, because if we truly do, we'll make choices and conduct actions based off of what we believe. And we want those actions being paralleled as steps to lead us to life, not destructions. So this is why it's so important over here where it's saying make all your ways, in other words, your actions, conduct, ethic, all of these things that are tangible steps that are leading you somewhere, either life or death, make all of those things acknowledge him, God. Well, what exactly does this word acknowledge mean? Okay. Another way we could say this is in all your actions, prove that you know him. In all of your ways, in all of your actions, ethics, character, conduct, prove, evidence that you know him. And now this word know is an interesting term, and you're probably somewhat familiar with it. You probably know it as interchangeable for intimacy in marriage or relationships throughout the Bible, right? Adam knew Eve, things of that nature. So to know, it's interesting. It means to have knowledge specifically by experience with. Okay, so let's look at a couple biblical narratives that I think paint that picture. Deuteronomy 34:10. No prophet has risen again in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. So this word knew is the same root as acknowledge. Okay? So there's this experiential element to this. Job 28:7. No bird of prey knows the path. No falcon's eye has seen it. Okay? And so I can't know a path if I've not experienced it. And that's what it means to see. Moses knew God, and God knew Moses face to face. They experienced it. They saw. All right? No bird knows the path. In other words, if you don't know a path, which is why we need a shepherd, right, as sheep, is you don't know how to live. You don't know right from wrong. You don't know what good conduct is. You don't know what wisdom is. You don't know what understanding is. You don't know the path that leads to life, right? That's why Jesus says, narrow is the gate that leads to life. Wide is the way that leads to destruction, right? There's a path. One is easier, one is harder, right? One is more obvious, one is not so obvious. We need a shepherd to lead us down this path, but we can't go down the path because we don't know it. We've not experienced it, all right? And the actions and the conduct and those things that are related to the path and the way. Genesis 30:26. Give me my wives and my children that I have worked for. Okay, this is Jacob talking. That I've worked for, and let me go. You know how hard I have worked for you. Well, what is this? Well, Laban knows how hard Jacob has worked because he's experienced the fruit of Jacob's labor. And so this word know, all the words know and knew and so on that I've looked at in these three verses are the same root as acknowledge in Proverbs 3:6. So in Proverbs 3:6, that's what the author is saying. In all of your ways, prove you know him. Well, how are you going to acknowledge him in your ways if you don't know him? You can't fathom, you can't conjure up the path. You don't know the path to walk. Because these steps are actions, their character, their ethic, their conduct. And if you don't know him, that means you don't know his character. You don't know his ethics. You don't know his conduct. So you can't walk on the same path. You can't commit actions in your life that prove you know him if you haven't had experience with him. That's why we need the shepherd, and that's why Jesus is so critical, okay? So, in other words, what the author is saying here is don't deny God with your actions, but instead acknowledge him with your actions, right? Because you know what he's like. Because you've experienced him. You know who he is. Therefore, if you claim to know, that's why Jesus says to the Pharisees, you claim to see. But since you claim to see and you don't, you're going to actually die in your sin. But what he's getting at is don't say you know God. Don't say you have experienced him and you know what he's like, his character and his nature. and then deny him by living contrary to how you know he lives, his character, his ethics, his conduct, and things of that nature, right? So the author is saying, don't deny God with your actions. Instead, acknowledge him with your actions, okay? Because you know what he's like. You know who he is, all right? This is what we saw in our last video. Jeremiah 9:23 and 24. The wise person should not boast in his wisdom, strong should not boast in strength, wealthy should not boast in wealth, but the one who boasts should boast in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord, showing faithful love, justice, righteousness on the earth, right? And if he knows me, you know these things. That's what the author is saying. That's what the Lord is saying through Jeremiah. If you understand and know me, you know that I show faithful love, justice, and righteousness on the earth. Therefore, you should walk in my ways. Acknowledge me. That means you should walk in righteousness, justice, and faithful love, for he delights in these things. If you know him and you know what he delights in, why wouldn't you walk in the ways that delight his heart? So understanding God and knowing God, right? Look at this. This is how verse 5 and 6 connect. Understanding in verse 5, this word for knowing, right, in verse 6, they connect. Understanding and knowing God, right, they go hand in hand, and they lead us to taking steps down a path of life. Taking steps means committing actions in the journey of life. The path is the journey of life, the process from birth to death, that journey of life. That's the path. And our steps are our ways, our actions, our conduct, things of that nature, okay? But I want to look at one more text in Titus 1:16 that I think ties this up very nicely before moving on to our next words. They claim to know God, have experienced God, right? Have truly experienced him, seen him, know what he's like, know who he is, but they deny him by their works or their ways or their actions, right? Their actions are detestable, disobedient, and unfit for any good work. So, in other words, if you know God, that will be evidenced by acknowledging that you know him, proving you know him in your ways or your actions, your conducts, right? And it'll produce fruit in your life, which are good works, is synonymous for that. Okay, so I hope you're starting to see what the author is saying here. And what you're going to discover is that the vast majority of the Proverbs is all about the fear of the Lord. And he's just spelling it out in different ways, trusting in, relying in, acknowledging, proving you know, all of those things. Okay, so let's move forward now. He will make straight your paths. Okay, so I want to talk about paths first, and then I want to talk about straight, okay? So I mentioned it earlier. I'm going to kind of try to keep it short here. Paths of life, they can take many different forms. We can have crooked paths. We can have straight paths. We can have paths full of thorns. We can have rocky paths full of, obstructions of various kinds, boulders and brush, and makes it very difficult to move to the next season or the next phase of life. Or we can have clear paths, right? We can have paths that are straight and they're clear and they're smooth, right? So paths denote the journey or the process of life, as I said before, right? It's the process of getting from where we are to where we're headed, right? And what the Lord is saying here is that if you will live a life that acknowledges me, that proves you know me by acting like me, right? I'm going to go before you and make your journey and process in life straight. So you're neither going to turn to the right nor the left. We see that language a lot in the Old Testament. But it's going to be straight. It's going to be clear, right? You're going to have paths that are clear and they're straight. And this path, right, is referring to the process of your life. Now, what kind of path? Let me just help, for my sake, draw this out just for a minute. All right, so we've got paths, but what's the adjective here? What kind of paths do we have? We have straight paths. Okay, so we know that paths, right, is the journey of life. All right? So what kind of life are you going to have? What kind of journey? Is it going to be rocky? Is it going to be flat? Is it going to be smooth? Well, God says, if you'll acknowledge him in your actions, the steps you take, right, on the path, if they acknowledge him by their actions that prove you know him, he's going to go ahead of you and do the heavy lifting and make this journey of life, this path, he's going to make that straight. So that begs the question, what is straight? What is a straight path? All right, so the Hebrew root word here for straight is yasher, all right? And it specifically refers to ethics, which is interesting. Let's look at Habakkuk 2:4. It says this, look, his ego is inflated. He is without integrity. Do you know what the root of integrity is here? Yasher, straight. Integrous paths. Right? The Lord's going to go before you and make integrous paths, right? Your character's going to be strengthened, right? But you're going to grow in wisdom, stature, and favor with God, okay? So we have integrity and straight sharing the same root, okay? The same root word. But straight here, what I want to note is that it can also apply to being easy or pleasing. So in a secondary sense, I suspect that the byproduct rather, of living a life where your actions, your steps on the path you take prove you know God by acknowledging him, right? That you're living like him, producing fruit of the Holy Spirit ultimately is what that is, right? That he's going to go before you and make your path straight, not only just with integrity, integrous paths, right? But he's going to make them easy and pleasant and light on your journey of life. This is what happens when we commit our ways to glorifying the Lord and representing him, displaying him, representing him in the earth. Let's look back. We looked at these in our last video, Proverbs 15:21, just to show you a couple verses and how they connect. Foolishness brings joy to one without sense, but a person with understanding walks a straight path. So here we have understanding from verse 5 being blended in and connected to straight paths from verse 6. Again, Psalms 37, 3 through 5, and really verse 5 is what I want to look at today. But we'll just read it all. Trust in the Lord and do what is good. Do what is good. Trusting in the Lord, doing what is good. Ways, ethical ways, all right? Ways that refers to your actions and character that are good and they represent God. That's what it means to acknowledge him. So trust in the Lord and do what is good means to acknowledge him in your ways, and you'll dwell in the land securely, right? So he will make your path straight, easier, pleasant, right? That's what live securely and land is really getting at here. So take delight in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart, right? Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him. He will act, right? We talked a bit about that last time. Commit your way. Acknowledge him. In your ways, acknowledge him. So this is another way to say the same thing. Okay, so this is Psalm 37:5. But it comes with a promise. He will act. Act how? Making your righteousness. Remember the yasher, right? Being tied to integrity, right? Shine like the dawn and your justice like the noonday. And this is getting back to what was the text we just read? Let me see if I can find it real quick. Jeremiah 9:23, right? The Lord, faithful, love, justice, righteousness. How are we supposed to be, right? In the same way, righteous, justice, right? So we're supposed to look like God as a byproduct of knowing and experiencing God's righteousness, God's justice, God's love, God's character, his nature, and so on and so forth. So I hope that this has been helpful, and between the last video and this video, that we have a really good deep understanding of the truths packed within Proverbs 3 verses 5 and 6. And then I hope you are walking away with tangible material that you can go and apply to your life beginning now. And I believe you're going to see the fruit of living a life that acknowledges God in all of your ways. And I think it's going to go well for you. He is a man of his word. He will go before you and make straight your paths. As always, thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, God bless you guys.